It was just to escape her ex, a quick, unintentional kiss. But when her lips touched the millionaire's, what was pretense turned to fire, and nothing in her life would be the same after that. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. Every day we post videos like this, continuing. It was just another ordinary Saturday at the Regent's Galleria in London. Artificial lights gleamed on the marble floor, while the constant hum of conversations mingled with the ambient sound. Marianne Evans adjusted her simple dress and ran a hand through her curly hair, trying to convince herself she was only there to buy a birthday present for her mother. A lie. In truth, she just wanted to escape her small rented apartment in the outer boroughs, where the walls seemed to hold echoes of the relationship that had ended less than 2 months ago. As she walked distractedly past the storefronts, far too expensive for her teacher's budget, her thoughts returned to the day she discovered the betrayal. Raphael, her boyfriend of 3 years, had become involved with Deborah, the headmistress of the private school where he worked, the one who always commented with a condescending smile how Marianne had potential but wasted her talent teaching in public schools. Marianne took a deep breath, trying to push away the memories. She was almost succeeding in distracting herself when the universe decided to test her limits. There, less than 10 yards away, they were. Raphael, impeccable in his navy blazer, and Deborah, with her perfectly straightened blonde hair and a dress that probably cost the equivalent of 2 months of Marianne's salary. The couple laughed as he pointed to something in a jewelry display. Marianne's stomach sank. She wasn't prepared for that encounter. Not yet. Not with the wound so exposed. In a desperate impulse, she spun on her heels to flee the scene, but the abrupt movement made her collide with someone. A tall man, with an athletic build and an impeccably tailored suit. For an instant, she was paralyzed, looking into a face of striking features and intense brown eyes that stared back at her in surprise. "Sorry, she stammered, but the words died when she realized Raphael had noticed her presence and was now approaching, with Deborah in tow. Panic seized her. She couldn't face them, not with that feeling of failure still throbbing in her chest. And then, in a fraction of a second that would change everything, the man in front of her seemed to read the desperation in her eyes. "Did I take long, love?" he said loud enough to be heard, in a deep tone that carried natural authority. The car park was a nightmare. Marianne felt his firm arm wrap around her waist. Without a second thought, driven by a mixture of wounded pride and emotional survival, she did the unthinkable. She rose on her tiptoes and kissed him. It was a kiss that began as an act, but something strange happened when their lips met. Instead of pulling back, the stranger deepened the kiss, holding her firmly, as if they truly were a passionate couple. When they separated, Marianne felt her face burn, and her eyes met Raphael's astonished expression, now standing a few steps away. "Marianne?" Raphael's voice sounded confused, almost offended. She turned, still supported by the stranger's arm. "Hi, Raphael. What a coincidence." "Aren't you going to introduce us?" Deborah asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The stranger extended his hand before Marianne could say anything. "Graham. Alistair," he said naturally. "Are you friends of Marianne's?" "Ex-boyfriend," Raphael replied, shaking his hand with visible discomfort. "I didn't know you. I mean, it hasn't been long since—" "Life goes on," Marianne managed to say, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "It certainly does," Deborah commented, examining Graham from head to toe, clearly impressed. "Have you known each other long?" Graham smiled, a contained smile that revealed nothing. "Long enough to know I've found someone special." Raphael's discomfort was palpable. "Well, it was. Good to see you, Marianne. We need to go." As they walked away, Marianne let out a shaky sigh and immediately pulled away from the stranger's embrace. "I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me. It was an impulse. "It's all right," he replied, adjusting his jacket with precise gestures. "It was an unusual situation. Thank you for playing along. I really wasn't ready to face them alone." Graham observed her for a moment, with an analytical expression that made her feel exposed. "Your ex seemed quite bothered to see you with me. Mission accomplished, I suppose." Marianne nodded, still embarrassed. Again, thank you, I need to go. She turned to leave, feeling her strange mix of relief and shame. She had kissed a complete stranger in a luxury shopping centre. What on earth was she thinking? She quickened her pace, wanting only to reach the car park and bury that bizarre day in some corner of her memory. But as she reached the exit, she heard quick footsteps behind her. It was him, Graham, walking towards her with a determined expression. "Wait," he called, catching up to her. "You didn't tell me your full name." "Marianne Evans," she replied, confused. "But why does that matter now?" "Because I have a proposal for you, Marianne Evans." Before she could protest, a black luxury car smoothly pulled up beside them. The driver got out and opened the back door. Graham gestured for her to get in. "Get in. I promise you won't regret hearing me out." All logic told her to refuse, to turn around and leave. But something in his eyes, an almost hypnotic intensity, made her hesitate. And there was also a curiosity she couldn't deny, an almost perverse desire to know what this man, clearly from another social world, could want with her. "5 minutes," she finally said, getting into the car. "And we'll stay in a public place." The interior of the vehicle was as luxurious as its external appearance suggested. Soft leather seats, polished wood, and state-of-the-art technology. Graham got in after her and gave an address to the driver. "We're going to the Ritz," he explained, referring to one of London's most exclusive restaurants. "I believe a conversation accompanied by a good dinner is more pleasant." "I'm not dressed for the Ritz," Marianne protested, suddenly conscious of her simple dress and low-heeled sandals. "You're perfect," he retorted, in a tone that brooked no argument. "And I have a permanent table there." During the ride, Graham finally introduced himself formally. He wasn't just Graham Alistair, but Graham Maxwell Alistair, heir to the Alistair Group, a business conglomerate that controlled, among other ventures, the Regent's Galleria itself, where they had met. "In fact, I was doing a surprise inspection when we bumped into each other," he explained, observing her reaction. "I like to personally check how operations are going." Marianne listened, still trying to process the surreal situation. She was in a car with a billionaire she had just accidentally kissed, a story none of her colleagues would believe. The restaurant, they were received with deference by the maître d', who led them to a discreet table in an elegant corner. After ordering, he choosing without consulting the menu, she opting for the first dish she recognized, Graham finally revealed the reason they were there. "I'll get straight to the point, Marianne. I need a girlfriend." She almost choked on the water she was drinking. "What?" "A fake girlfriend," he clarified, leaning slightly across the table. "For 6 months, to be exact." "Is this some kind of joke?" Marianne asked, looking for signs that she was being secretly filmed. "Far from it. It's a business arrangement. You pretend to be my girlfriend at social events, family dinners, and public appearances. In return..." He paused, as if assessing how much that service would be worth. "In return, I offer you £100,000 a month." The amount hit her like a punch. £600,000 at the end of the contract. It was more money than she would ever see as a public school teacher. "Why me?" "You could hire any model or actress." Graham took a sip of wine before answering. "First, because it had to be someone unknown, with no connections to my social circle. Second, because you showed natural talent for acting today. And third," he looked at her directly, "because I saw in your eyes, when you faced your ex, a strength few people possess." Marianne felt her face flush. It was hard not to feel flattered, even knowing it was probably just a persuasion technique. "And why do you need a fake girlfriend? Someone with your status surely wouldn't have trouble finding company." A bitter smile passed over his lips. "My father is dying, terminal cancer. His biggest frustration is not seeing me settled, as he says. In recent weeks, he's intensified his efforts to push me into an arranged marriage with a partner's daughter. A purely business union." He paused. "I want to give him the peace of seeing me with someone, but on my terms." "And that person would be me? A teacher from the outer boroughs with no connections or influence?" "Precisely. Someone who doesn't pose a real threat to the family empire, but who can give my father the illusion he desires before he passes." The bluntness of that logic hurt her more than it should have. After all, they didn't know each other. She owed him nothing. And if I refuse, then we leave here as strangers, which we are. No hard feelings. Silence fell between them as the waiter served the starter. Marianne observed the man across from her. There was something magnetic about him, a mix of arrogance and vulnerability that seemed impossible to exist in the same person. "Would I have to quit my job?" she finally asked. "Not necessarily, but it would be more convenient if you could take a leave of absence. The social calendar would be intense." Marianne thought of the tiny apartment she could barely afford, the bills accumulated after breaking up with Raphael, who had always split expenses. She thought of her mother, who needed treatment for arthritis and partially depended on her. £600,000 would solve all those problems and allow her to breathe financially for the first time in her life. What would be the rules, she asked, surprising herself that she was even considering the proposal. Graham smiled slightly, as if he already knew she would accept. Absolute discretion, a confidentiality agreement naturally. You would have to temporarily move into an apartment I'll provide to facilitate our cohabitation. You'd have to learn basic social etiquette and dress appropriately for events, all paid for by me, of course. And what about... She hesitated, embarrassed. Physical displays of affection? Like today's kiss? He looked at her intensely. Only what's necessary to maintain appearances. Nothing beyond what you feel comfortable doing. Marianne took a deep breath. Was she really considering this madness? Why do you think I'd be able to fool your family and friends? I come from a completely different world than yours. Precisely because of that, Graham replied. My father has an infallible radar for falsehoods within our social circle. Someone genuinely from outside with different values. That would disorient him enough not to notice the act. The main course arrived, and they ate in silence for a few minutes. Marianne tried to organize her thoughts, weigh the pros and cons, ignore the alarm in her mind telling her this was complete insanity. If I accept, she finally said, I want some conditions. Graham raised an eyebrow, genuinely intrigued. I'm listening. I want autonomy to withdraw from the agreement if I feel uncomfortable. I want to continue giving some private lessons so as not to lose my professional rhythm. And I want to be able to help my mother financially without raising suspicion. He nodded slowly. We can incorporate all that into the contract. And I want half the amount up front. This made him smile openly for the first time, a smile that transformed his serious face into something surprisingly approachable. A negotiator. I like that. Marianne also smiled, a mix of nervousness and excitement taking over her. I haven't said yes yet. But you will, he replied with conviction, because like me you have something to prove. The statement caught her by surprise. How could he read her so well after just a few hours? To whom would I have to prove something? To yourself first, and perhaps, he made a vague gesture with his hand, to an ex-boyfriend and his new partner, who clearly made you feel inferior. The words struck Marianne with the precision of an arrow. It was true. Part of her, a part she didn't like to admit, wanted to show Raphael and Deborah that she too could navigate a world of luxury and privilege, that she could be by the side of someone like Graham. Maxwell Alistair. 6 months, she said, extending her hand across the table. Not a day more. He shook her hand, a firm, confident touch that sent an unexpected wave of warmth through Marianne's arm. Deal. When they left the restaurant, it was past midnight. Marianne felt slightly dizzy, not from the wine she had barely touched, but from the magnitude of the decision she had just made. Graham walked her to the car, which was waiting at the entrance. The driver will take you home, he said. Tomorrow I'll send the documents for your signature, and on Monday we'll begin. Preparations. So fast? Time is a luxury we don't have. My father... He didn't finish the sentence, but it wasn't necessary. As the car began to pull away, Marianne looked out the back window and saw Graham still standing on the pavement, watching her leave. A shiver ran down her spine. Something told her she had just embarked on the most dangerous journey of her life. not because of the money or the agreement itself, but because of the man with whom she had made it, a man who, with a single accidental kiss, had already awakened sensations she had thought dead after Raphael's betrayal, a man whose eyes seemed to see through her, uncovering secrets she didn't fully know herself, a man whose proximity for the next 6 months could be both her salvation and her ruin. The car glided silently through the streets of London, taking her back to her world. But Marianne knew that the next morning she would begin the transition to a completely different reality, a reality of luxury, power, and lies, where an impulsive kiss could cost much more than she was prepared to pay. On Monday at 9 in the morning sharp, a firm knock sounded on Marianne's apartment door. She had been awake for hours, her stomach churning with anxiety. She opened the door to find a woman of approximately 40, hair perfectly styled in a severe bun and an impeccably tailored suit. "Miss Evans, I'm Teresa Collins, Mr. Alistair's personal assistant. I've come to take you to begin the procedures." Procedures, as if she were undergoing surgery, not starting a fake relationship. 2 hours later, Marianne found herself in a spacious office at the top of a skyscraper in London's financial district. Before her lay a confidentiality agreement and the financial arrangement she had negotiated with Graham, everything meticulously detailed, from the monthly amount to her expected duties. It even included a specific clause about public displays of affection, limited to what is socially acceptable and comfortable for both parties. "Where's Graham?" she asked after signing all copies. "Mr. Alistair had a family emergency," Teresa replied, collecting the documents. "His father had a relapse overnight. He asked me to convey his apologies and inform you that he expects to see you tonight for the first event." "What event?" "A dinner at the Alistair residence. It will be your official introduction to the family." Teresa consulted her wristwatch. "We have exactly 8 hours to prepare you." What followed was a true transformation. Marianne was taken to exclusive boutiques, where a stylist was already waiting with a selection of dresses. Then to one of the city's most expensive salons, where her hair was treated and styled into soft waves that enhanced her face. Finally, a professional makeup artist applied makeup that highlighted her brown eyes and full lips, maintaining a natural yet sophisticated appearance. By late afternoon, when she looked at herself in the mirror of the improvised dressing room, Marianne barely recognized herself. The woman staring back at her seemed to naturally belong to Graham's world, elegant, refined, confident. But it was just an illusion, and she knew it. Beneath the designer dress and expensive makeup, she was still the same teacher from the outer boroughs, daughter of a cleaner and a bus driver. "It's time," Teresa announced, handing her a small clutch bag. "The car is waiting." The vehicle drove them through increasingly exclusive neighborhoods until they reached an imposing property in Hampstead Heath. More than a house, it was a mansion surrounded by high walls and a monumental electronic gate. As the car passed through the meticulously maintained front garden and parked before the main entrance, Marianne felt her heart race. "Take a deep breath," Teresa advised, in an almost maternal tone that contrasted with her rigid appearance. "Remember everything we discussed, and more importantly, remember that Mr. Alistair chose you for a reason." Before Marianne could respond, the car door was opened by a uniformed security guard. And there, at the top of the staircase leading to the mansion's entrance, stood Graham. Different from the businessman she had met at the shopping centre, he now looked even more imposing in his custom-tailored suit. But there was something else in his gaze, a tension, perhaps concern, that wasn't there before. He descended the steps and extended his hand to help her out of the car. When their fingers touched, Marianne felt that strange electric current again. "You look stunning," he murmured, leaning in to kiss her cheek. His scent enveloped her, something woody and intense that seemed to complement his dominant presence. For a moment, she forgot that it was all just an act. "How is your father?" she asked softly. A shadow passed over his face. "Stable for now and determined to meet you." Graham offered his arm, which she accepted with a confidence she didn't feel. As they ascended the staircase together, he whispered, "Remember, My mother is loving and will accept you easily. My father is the challenge. He will be suspicious. He will test you. Be authentic. It's your best defense. How did we meet? We need to align our story. I've already taken care of it. We met at an educational charity event 3 months ago. You were representing your school. I was impressed by your passion for teaching and invited you for coffee. The rest, as they say, is history. The lie was good, plausible enough and close to her professional reality that she could sustain it without much effort. The mansion's double doors opened as they approached, revealing an entrance hall that seemed straight out of a period film. A butler greeted them with a discreet bow. "They are in the drawing room, sir." Marianne took a deep breath, feeling the weight of that moment. She was about to enter the lion's den, pretending to be someone she wasn't, all for money. A part of her was ashamed, but another, the part that had grown up facing difficulties, the part that refused to be defeated, was determined to play her role perfectly. "Shall we?" Graham asked, his arm firm under her fingers. "Let's," she replied, lifting her chin. And together they crossed the threshold that separated the real world from the elaborate fantasy they had agreed to create. The Alistair Mansion's drawing room exuded opulence in every detail. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling. Original artworks adorned the walls, and antique furniture harmoniously contrasted with contemporary design pieces. In the center of that imposing setting, seated in an armchair that looked more like a throne, was Edward Alistair. Despite the illness consuming his body, the family patriarch maintained an upright posture, sharp eyes that seemed to evaluate everything and everyone around him. Beside him, on an elegant sofa, sat Eloise Alistair, Graham's mother, a woman of 60, whose classic beauty had been preserved with the aid of the best treatments money could buy. Her smile, however, seemed genuinely warm when Graham and Marianne entered the room. "Son," she rose, extending her arms, "we were eager to see you." Graham embraced his mother with evident affection before turning to his father. "How are you feeling today, father?" Edward made an impatient gesture. "Surviving. But it's not about me I want to talk. Introduce us to your friend." The tone was cutting, almost challenging. Marianne felt Graham's arm tense under her fingers. "This is Marianne Evans," he said, bringing her slightly forward. "Marianne, my parents, Edward, and Eloise Alistair." Eloise approached first, taking Marianne's hands in hers. "We finally meet the woman who achieved what no other has, capturing my son's attention for more than a few weeks." Marianne smiled, trying to appear naturally charming. "The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Alistair." "Eloise, please," the woman insisted before stepping back. Edward remained seated, observing Marianne with clinical eyes. "So, Miss Evans, Graham tells us you're a teacher." "Yes, sir. I teach literature and English to high school students. In a public school," he added, not as a question but as a statement. "A noble job." The condescending tone was impossible to ignore. Marianne felt a wave of genuine irritation, which she decided to use to her advantage. Perhaps authenticity truly was her best defense. "An essential job," she corrected politely, holding the man's gaze. "I believe quality, public education is the greatest tool for social transformation we have." A slight smile appeared on Edward's lips, not of approval, but of interest, like a scientist observing an unexpected reaction in an experiment. "Interesting. And do you intend to continue this mission now that you're involved with my son?" Before Marianne could respond, Graham intervened. "Father, Marianne and I haven't discussed her professional future. We're still getting to know each other." "Naturally," Edward replied without taking his eyes off Marianne. "Just curious about your new companion's ambitions." "My ambitions have always involved education, Mr. Alistair," Marianne responded, keeping her voice firm. "I don't see why that would change. Even when there are more lucrative opportunities available?" The insinuation was clear. Edward was suggesting she was with Graham for financial gain. The irony was not lost on Marianne. It was exactly the case, but not in the way he imagined. "I believe true wealth isn't measured solely by bank figures, Mr. Alistair." Edward let out a dry laugh, which soon turned into a worrying cough. Eloise immediately approached with a glass of water and a small medicine bottle. After a tense moment, the patriarch recovered. "Let's have dinner," Eloise announced, trying to ease the tension. "The table is already set." During dinner, served by a team of staff in a room with a table for 20, the conversation flowed surprisingly well. Eloise asked about Marianne's family, her background, her tastes. Graham occasionally kept a hand on hers, a gesture that was supposed to be just part of the act, but which sent involuntary shivers down Marianne's arm each time it happened. Edward, after his coughing fit, seemed less aggressive, but no less observant. When dessert was served, he finally resumed his interrogation. "Tell me, Miss Evans, what do you think about the current state of education in the United Kingdom?" It was a trick question. Marianne knew her answer could reveal her political leanings, something that would certainly be used against her. She decided to be diplomatic, but honest. "I think it's far below what we could and should offer. There's a lack of investment, teacher appreciation, and a long-term vision. And the solution would be multifaceted. There's no magic formula. We need consistent public policies, private sector participation, family involvement." Edward interrupted her. "The private sector? Interesting. Most teachers I know believe education should be exclusively state-run." "Perhaps you don't know enough teachers," Marianne replied, unable to suppress a slight provocative tone. She immediately regretted it, fearing she had gone too far. To her surprise, Edward let out a laugh, genuine this time, not sardonic. "Touché, Miss Evans, touché." Graham seemed as surprised as she was. His hand squeezed hers under the table, a gesture that seemed to say, "Well played." After dinner, Eloise suggested they have coffee on the veranda overlooking the illuminated gardens. Edward, however, announced that he needed to retire. "The treatment exhausts me," he explained, rising with some difficulty. Before leaving, he turned to Marianne. "It was interesting meeting you, Miss Evans. I hope to see you again." When he left, accompanied by a nurse who waited discreetly in the hallway, Eloise sighed. That was a triumph. Edward rarely says he hopes to see someone again. On the veranda, while Graham went to answer a phone call, Eloise took the opportunity to speak with Marianne alone. "I don't know how you and my son really met, or what exists between you," she said in a low voice. "But I see how he looks at you, different from any other woman he's brought here before." "We are getting to know each other," Marianne replied, feeling the weight of the lie. "My husband doesn't have much time," Eloise continued. "He built an empire, but his biggest concern now is Graham. He fears our son will get lost after he's gone, that he'll drown in responsibilities or worse, reject them completely. Graham seems very capable. He is, but he's also lonely, always has been. He grew up in the shadow of his father's expectations, trying to prove his worth." Eloise touched Marianne's arm. "I don't know what you represent to him, but I see something different in his eyes when he's with you. Something that gives me hope." Before Marianne could respond, Graham returned. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Eloise's words continued to echo in her mind. When they finally said goodbye, it was past midnight. In the car, returning to the apartment Graham had provided for her in Kensington, an affluent borough of the city, the silence between them was comfortable. "You were impressive," he finally said. "My father rarely shows any form of approval, especially at a first meeting." "I was just myself," Marianne replied, realizing it was true. Despite the expensive dress and the luxurious setting, her answers had been genuine. "That's what makes you perfect for this role," Graham commented, looking out the window. "Your authenticity is refreshing in this world of appearances." There was something in his voice, a vulnerability that contrasted with his public image as a ruthless businessman. For a moment, Marianne felt a connection that went beyond the commercial agreement they had established. "Your father seems to be suffering," she observed softly. "He would never admit it," Graham replied, a sad smile on his lips. "Edward Alastair never shows weakness, not even in the face of death." "And you? How are you dealing with all this?" The question seemed to surprise him. "No one usually asks me that," he admitted. "Everyone assumes I'm fine, that I'm strong like him." "And are you?" Graham looked into her eyes, an almost painful intensity in his gaze. "No, I'm not. But that's between us, right?" "Of course," Marianne nodded, feeling strangely privileged to witness that moment of vulnerability. When they arrived at the building where her new temporary apartment was located, Graham walked her to the door. "Tomorrow we have a charity event, something more public. Teresa will pick you up at 7 p.m. "I'll be ready." There was an awkward moment, almost as if both expected something. A good-night kiss, perhaps. But neither moved. "Good night, Marianne." "Good night, Graham." In the weeks that followed, Marianne fully immersed herself in her new double life. During the day, she occasionally gave private lessons to a few students, maintaining a connection to her real identity. At night, she transformed into Graham Maxwell Allister's perfect companion, navigating dinners, charity galas, and corporate events with increasing ease. To her surprise, the world of London's high society, which she had previously only seen in magazines and news, proved to be less glamorous and more political than she imagined. There were invisible hierarchies, strategic alliances, and a constant exchange of favors disguised under polite smiles and seemingly trivial conversations. Graham was a central figure in this universe. Wherever they went, he attracted attention, not just for his fortune or appearance, but for a natural magnetism that drew people to him. And, as his official companion, Marianne now shared some of that magnetic power. "Graham never brought the same woman to 2 consecutive events," a socialite commented during a charity cocktail party, examining Marianne with ill-concealed curiosity. "You must be special. Or perhaps he's evolving," Marianne replied with a polite smile. The woman laughed, raising her champagne glass. "Darling, men like Graham Allister don't evolve. They conquer, consume, and move on. It's their nature." The words stayed with Marianne, even after she walked away. Was this the real Graham? Was the man who occasionally revealed vulnerability and kindness when they were alone just another face of his performance? In their 3rd month of relationship, during a weekend trip to the South Coast, where the Allisters maintained a beach house in Brighton, Marianne finally had the opportunity to get to know the man behind the image better. It was a warm summer night, and they were alone on the house's veranda, looking out at the sea. Edward had suffered a relapse and had to stay in London with Eloise. At his mother's insistence, Graham kept their travel plans, taking only Marianne. "First time we're really alone, without an audience," he commented, pouring 2 glasses of wine. It was true. Even in their daily lives, there were always staff, drivers, assistants, or the constant hum of professional commitments. Here, with only the sound of the waves as background, they were just 2 people trying to decipher the roles they were playing. "How is your father?" Marianne asked, accepting the glass. "Worsening," Graham replied simply. "Doctors are talking about weeks, not months anymore." "I'm sorry." He nodded, looking at the horizon. "The strange thing is, despite our complicated relationship, I can't imagine a world without him. Edward has always been the gravitational force of our family, the center around which we all orbit. And now you'll have to be that center." "Exactly." He looked at her with an intensity that made her heart race. "How? Do you know that? How can you understand something I couldn't even articulate?" Marianne shrugged, suddenly conscious of the closeness between them. "Perhaps because I come from outside. Sometimes we need distance to see the full picture." "That's why we work so well together," Graham commented with a half-smile. "You see things I don't see. You balance my vision." "We work well as business partners," Marianne corrected, feeling the need to reaffirm the nature of their agreement. "Our contract has been mutually beneficial." Something passed through his eyes. Disappointment? Irritation? But it quickly disappeared. "Of course. The contract." Graham moved away slightly. "Speaking of which, I think we should discuss an extension." "Extension? We still have 3 months left." "Yes, but at the rate my father is going—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "I'll need you by my side during the mourning period, and then for the transition of power in the company. I'm thinking another 6 months, with a substantial bonus." Marianne felt a pang of discomfort. There was something wrong with negotiating while his father was dying. But on the other hand, wasn't that what she had agreed to do? To be a constant presence in exchange for financial compensation? "Let's talk about it later," she suggested softly. "Now is not the time." Graham nodded, visibly tense. "You're right. Sorry." They remained silent for a few minutes, just watching the stars and listening to the sea. "You know what's funny?" he finally said. "Sometimes I forget this isn't real, that we're not a real couple," she completed when he hesitated. "Yes." His eyes met hers. "When we're like this, alone, it feels so natural." Marianne felt a lump in her throat. In recent weeks, it had become increasingly difficult to separate the acting from the genuine, feelings that were beginning to blossom. The way her body reacted to his touch, the comfort she felt in his presence, the ease with which they talked about everything and nothing, these were signs she desperately tried to ignore. "It's because we're good actors," she replied, more to herself than to him. "Is that what you think, that we're just acting?" There was a challenge in his voice. Marianne stood up, suddenly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I think it's getting late and we've had a long day." Graham also stood up, subtly blocking her path. They were so close she could feel the heat emanating from him, the scent that had already become familiar. "Marianne," he said, his voice a husky whisper, "don't tell me you don't feel anything." Before she could answer, Graham's phone rang, cutting the moment short. He looked at the screen and his face paled. "It's the hospital." The call lasted less than a minute, but when he hung up, Graham seemed like a different person. All the previous vulnerability had disappeared, replaced by a mask of control. "We need to go back to London immediately. My father had a complication." In less than an hour, they were in the family's private helicopter, cutting through the night towards the capital. Throughout the journey, Graham remained silent, staring out the window, lost in thought. Marianne respected his space, offering only her silent presence as support. At the hospital, they found Eloise in the waiting room, her eyes red from crying. "He's stable now," she informed, hugging her son, "but the doctors say it was a close call." Graham nodded, visibly relieved. "Can I see him?" "Not yet, he's sedated." It was a long night. Marianne stayed by Graham and Eloise's side, serving coffee, listening to the stories the mother shared about Edward in happier times before the illness. Around 5 in the morning, when Eloise finally fell asleep in an armchair, Graham turned to Marianne. "You didn't have to stay." "I know, but I wanted to." He held her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Why?" Marianne could have given many answers. That it was her contractual duty, that she was just keeping up appearances, that she cared about him as she would care about anyone going through a difficult time, but the truth was more complex and frightening. "Because I care about you," she said simply, "more than I should." Graham's eyes, tired but intense, fixed on hers. Slowly, he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't like the theatrical kiss at the shopping centre, nor like the calculated kisses they exchanged at events. It was something different, something real. When they separated, Marianne felt a mixture of fear and excitement. They had crossed an invisible line, and there was no going back. "This complicates things," she murmured. "I've always liked complications," he replied with a tired smile. In the following weeks, Edward's health fluctuated between crises and periods of relative stability. Marianne found herself increasingly involved in the family dynamic, no longer as a hired outsider, but as a genuine pillar of support for Graham, and, surprisingly, also for Eloise. Her relationship with Graham evolved into something no contract could define. They continued to maintain appearances in public, but when they were alone, the acting gave way to a growing intimacy. Not just physical, although that aspect had developed with a breathtaking intensity for both of them, but emotional. They talked about their childhoods, their fears, their aspirations. Graham revealed the overwhelming pressure of growing up as the sole heir to an empire, while Marianne shared the difficulties of being the daughter of parents who worked incessantly to provide her with opportunities they never had. But not everything was rosy. The closer Marianne became to the Alistair family, the more visible she became to the press and to the social circle Graham belonged to, and, inevitably, questions began to arise. The first major obstacle came in the form of Deborah, the former headmistress who was now dating Raphael. At a charity event for education, which Marianne attended alongside Graham, Deborah approached them during the cocktail reception. "What a surprise to find you here," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Marianne, you're absolutely transformed." Graham, sensing the tension, placed a protective arm around Marianne's waist. "You know Deborah." "We worked together," Marianne replied, maintaining her composure. "Some time ago." "Oh, more than that," Deborah continued, with false sweetness. "We were almost friends, until, well, circumstances separated us." "Circumstances have that habit," Marianne replied, with a polite smile. "How is Raphael?" "Very well. He's around here somewhere. I'm sure he'd love to see you again." Before Marianne could respond, Graham intervened. "Unfortunately, we're leaving. It was a pleasure meeting you, Deborah." As they walked away, he kept his hand firmly on her back. "Ex-friend? Ex-boss, current girlfriend of my ex." Graham raised an eyebrow. "The same ex from the shopping centre. It seems the world is smaller than we thought." "Too small," Marianne agreed, feeling a knot in her stomach, "and Deborah was always too observant for my liking." "Are you worried about what she might do?" Marianne hesitated. "I don't know. But if anyone could suspect our original agreement, it would be her." The next morning, her concerns materialized in the form of a text message from Teresa. "We need to talk. Potential problem." In Graham's office, Teresa showed them an email Deborah had sent to the Alastair Group's press office. The tone was polite, but the underlying threat was clear. She had concerns about Graham's sudden relationship with a former employee who, until recently, had lived a much more modest life. "She's implying our relationship is a sham," Marianne concluded, feeling her blood run cold. "Or worse, that I'm some kind of opportunist." "Which is exactly what my father initially thought," Graham commented, running a hand through his hair. "But even he has abandoned that theory now." "What will we do?" Teresa asked, ever practical. Graham looked at Marianne. "Nothing. We won't dignify this with a response. If she tries anything more concrete, we'll deal with it legally." But the email was just the beginning. In the following days, rumors began circulating in society columns. Nothing explicit, insinuations that Graham's relationship was convenient, given his father's illness, speculations about Marianne's meteoric rise in London society. To make matters worse, Raphael appeared at the building where Marianne now lived, demanding to speak with her. The doorman, fortunately, followed security protocols and did not allow him entry, but the incident left Marianne shaken. "He has no right to show up like that," Graham said, furious when he found out. "I'll get a restraining order." "No," Marianne protested. "That would only attract more attention. We need to be strategic." Graham observed her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "How do you stay calm? If someone threatened to expose the truth about us 3 months ago, I would expect to see you in a panic." Marianne smiled sadly. "The irony is that there's no longer a simple truth to expose. We started with a contract, yes, but now—" She hesitated, unsure how to define what they had become. "Now it's real," Graham completed, holding her face in his hands. "At least for me." Marianne's heart raced. "For me too," she admitted, finally giving voice to what she had felt for weeks. That night, when they made love for the first time, there were no longer any barriers between them, neither contractual nor emotional. It was as if, after months of playing a role, Marianne had finally become the person she pretended to be, the woman who loved Graham Maxwell Alastair, but their newfound happiness would soon be tested. The next morning, while they were still in bed, Graham's phone rang again. It was Eloise, her voice trembling. "Edward is asking to see you, both of you, now." At the hospital, they found Edward more fragile than ever, but with clear, lucid eyes. When they entered the room, he gestured for them to approach. "I don't have much time," he said, without preamble, "and there's something I need to tell both of you." Graham held his father's hand, visibly emotional. "We're listening, Father." Edward looked directly at Marianne. "At first I thought you were another of my son's fleeting conquests. Then I suspected you were an opportunist. I was wrong in both cases." Marianne felt a lump in her throat. "I've seen how you look at each other," Edward continued, his voice growing weaker. "I've seen how you make him a better person, Marianne, and that's why I want you to know you have my blessing." Graham squeezed Marianne's hand, his eyes moist. "Thank you, Father," he said, his voice choked. Edward made an impatient gesture. "I'm not finished. I also know there's something you're not telling me, something about how it all began." Marianne's heart stopped for an instant. Did he know? "It doesn't matter anymore," Edward continued. "What matters is where you are now and what you will build together after I'm gone." Eloise entered the room at that moment, interrupting the conversation. "The doctors need to run some tests," she announced with a forced smile. As they left the room, Graham pulled Marianne into an isolated corner of the hallway. "He knows," he said incredulously, "or at least he suspects." "And he still gave us his blessing," Marianne replied, equally surprised. Graham looked at her, a clear decision in his eyes. "This changes everything, doesn't it? There's no longer a reason to maintain the charade." I mean we don't need a contract anymore." He held her hands. "I want you in my life, Marianne. Not as a hired girlfriend, but as the woman I love." The words, so simple and direct, hit Marianne with the force of a revelation. All the fears and insecurities that still lingered, the fear that, when the contract ended, he would move on, the fear that the difference in worlds would be insurmountable, seemed insignificant in the face of the sincerity in his eyes. "I love you too," she replied, feeling as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders, "more than I ever thought possible." There, in the sterile hospital corridor, under the distant gaze of hurried nurses, they sealed a promise that no legal document could contain, a promise of true love, born of the most improbable circumstances. But as they embraced, Marianne couldn't completely shake a shadow of concern. They had overcome Edward's obstacle, but Deborah and Raphael were still out there, determined to expose what they believed to be the truth. And more importantly, the world Graham belonged to, a world of privilege, power, and expectations, was still foreign to her. Loving Graham was one thing, belonging to his world another entirely, and that would be the true test for the feeling that had blossomed between them. 3 days after the hospital visit, Edward Alistair passed away. It was a serene death in his sleep, with Eloise by his side holding his hand. When Graham and Marianne arrived, they found the matriarch silently sitting by her husband's body, a mixture of pain and relief in her exhausted gaze. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The passing of one of London's most influential businessmen mobilized the media, the financial market, and all of high society. The wake, held at the family mansion, turned into an almost political event, with the presence of government officials, prominent business figures, and even a former prime minister. Amidst the chaos of Edward's public death, Marianne found her place by Graham's side, no longer as the contracted girlfriend, but as the emotional anchor that kept him steady. She watched him navigate between condolences and subtle negotiations that were happening even there, before his father's coffin, admiring his strength and composure. "How are you feeling?" she asked during a rare moment of privacy, when they found refuge in the mansion's library. Graham let out a heavy sigh, collapsing into a leather armchair. Empty, and at the same time, suffocated by expectations. What expectations? "Everyone is watching, waiting to see what I'll do now, whether I'll maintain my father's legacy or destroy it." He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of deep weariness. "The stock market has already reacted. The group's shares have fallen 4% since the announcement of his death." Marianne knelt before him, holding his hands. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone now. You just need to process your loss." "I don't have that luxury," he replied with a sad smile. "Edward Alistair didn't raise a son who could afford to feel. But you're not just his son. You're also your own person." Marianne squeezed his hands. "And that person has a right to their grief." The look Graham gave her contained a vulnerability few had witnessed. Slowly, he pulled her onto his lap and buried his face in her neck. His body trembled with silent sobs as, for the first time since his father's death, he allowed himself to truly feel the loss. Marianne held him tight, murmuring words of comfort, grateful to be able to offer him this moment of humanity amidst the spectacle his pain had become. They didn't notice the door opening, nor the figure observing them from the entrance. Only when they heard a discreet cough did they separate, meeting the curious gaze of Cecilia Montgomery, the daughter of Edward's main business partner, the same woman who had been considered for the arranged marriage Graham had mentioned at their first dinner. "Sorry to interrupt," she said with a smile. That didn't reach her eyes. "Eloise is looking for you. The last guests are leaving." When they returned to the main hall, Marianne noticed the glances that followed them, some curious, others clearly disapproving. Her presence beside Graham, at such a crucial moment, did not go unnoticed. It was as if everyone was waiting to see how long it would last now that the patriarch was gone. The night was long, but eventually the mansion emptied. Only Eloise, Graham, Marianne, and a few staff remained. When they finally retired, physically and emotionally exhausted, Graham held Marianne's hand. "Stay with me tonight," he asked, almost a whisper. "I don't want to be alone." The next morning, Marianne woke up in Graham's arms, observing his relaxed face in sleep. Even in this vulnerable moment, there was an undeniable strength in his features, the same kind of determination she had seen in Edward. Careful not to wake him, she slipped out of bed and put on the dressing gown she found in the closet. She needed a moment alone to organize her thoughts. The last 24 hours had solidified something within her. She loved Graham without a doubt. But the world he belonged to, this world of power, money, and constant political games, still frightened her. She went downstairs silently, heading for the kitchen for coffee. To her surprise, she found Eloise already awake, sitting at the breakfast nook table, looking at an untouched cup. "Good morning," Marianne said softly, hesitant to interrupt. Eloise looked up, a small smile appearing on her tired face. "Good morning, dear. Join me?" Marianne nodded, pouring herself some coffee before sitting at the table. They sat in silence for a few minutes, just each other's presence as comfort. "You know," Eloise finally spoke, "Edward and I met when I was about your age." "Really?" "Yes, I was a receptionist at his company." She smiled at the memory. "Everyone thought I was after his money. My own family warned me I would only be a temporary diversion for a man like him." Marianne swallowed hard, the similarity to her own situation too obvious to ignore. "What happened?" "We got married 6 months after we met. It was a scandal at the time." Eloise took a sip of coffee. "We spent 42 years together, and until the last day there were people who thought I didn't deserve to be by his side. How did you endure that?" "I understood that what mattered was what Edward and I knew about our love, not what others thought." Eloise looked directly into Marianne's eyes. "It takes a backbone of steel to love an Alistair, dear, especially when you come from outside that world." "Are you testing me?" Marianne asked, feeling exposed. "I'm offering you the truth. My son loves you. I can see it clearly, but the path you two have ahead will not be easy. Because of our different backgrounds, because of everything, the empire Edward built now rests on Graham's shoulders, and by extension on the shoulders of whoever is by his side." Before Marianne could respond, her phone vibrated. It was a message from a colleague at the school where she worked, sharing a link. With her stomach sinking in anticipation, Marianne opened it. It was an article on a gossip blog titled "The Teacher and the Billionaire, Romance or Opportunism." It contained details about her previous life, her relationship with Raphael, and insinuations about the convenience of her involvement with Graham, coinciding with his father's terminal illness. "Problems?" Eloise asked, observing her expression. Marianne hesitated, but then showed her the phone. Eloise read quickly, her face hardening. "Deborah," Marianne explained. "My ex's new girlfriend." "Fascinating how some people dedicate so much energy to pettiness," Eloise commented, returning the phone. "What do you intend to do?" "I don't know," Marianne admitted, "but I don't want Graham to see this now. He's already dealing with too much." "Wise decision. Let me handle it." Before Marianne could protest, Eloise was already making a call. In a few minutes, she had activated the company's legal team to assess possible actions against the blog. The efficiency with which she handled the situation was impressive and a little intimidating. "Don't worry about it now," Eloise said, finishing the call. "Gossip comes and goes. What remains is what we build." That afternoon, after Edward's burial, an emergency meeting of the Alistair Group's board of directors was held. Graham, as the new chairman, needed to make his first official statement. Marianne watched him prepare, donning an invisible armor of composure and authority. "Do you want me to wait here?" she asked, when the car that would take them to the company headquarters arrived. "No," Graham replied, surprising her. "I want you by my side." The boardroom was intimidating. A huge dark wood table surrounded by leather chairs, where 12 men and 2 women awaited, all in impeccable suits and calculably neutral expressions. When Graham entered, accompanied by Marianne, there was a noticeable moment of surprise. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, indicating a chair beside him for Marianne to sit, "thank you for your presence in this difficult time." What followed was an impressive display of leadership. Graham presented his initial plans for the transition, addressed concerns about financial stability, and answered questions with serene confidence. Marianne watched him with a mixture of pride and admiration, seeing him finally occupy the space he had been prepared to assume his entire life. After the meeting, as they left the building, they were greeted by a small crowd of reporters. Among them, Marianne immediately recognized Raphael, now wearing a badge from an online news outlet. "Mr. Alistair," he called, pushing a microphone towards them, "how do you respond to accusations that your relationship with Marianne Evans began as a financial arrangement?" Time seemed to freeze. Marianne felt the blood drain from her face as Graham was momentarily paralyzed beside her. The question was so direct, so specific, that it could only have come from someone with inside knowledge. Raphael continued, relentless. "Sources claim Miss Evans was hired to pretend to be your girlfriend during your father's illness. Could you comment?" Security guards were already moving to intervene, but Graham raised his hand, stopping them. His face, which moments before showed the impact of the accusation, now displayed a calculated calm. "I don't know your sources, Mr. Raphael Davies, New Media Portal. Mr. Davies, but I suggest you verify them better before making potentially defamatory accusations." Graham took a step forward, approaching Raphael. "I met Marianne at a time of great personal vulnerability, yes, and she has been my strength ever since. As for the exact nature of how our relationship began, that concerns only us." "So you don't deny there was a financial agreement?" "What I deny," Graham replied, his voice dangerously calm, "is the insinuation that what we have now is not genuine." He turned to Marianne, holding her hand. "What we have built together is worth more than any figure." With that, the security guards finally intervened, clearing a path for them to get into the waiting car. When the door closed, isolating them from the external commotion, Marianne finally breathed. "They know," she said, her voice trembling. "Raphael and Deborah know about the contract." "They suspect," Graham corrected. "They don't have concrete proof. And even if they did," he held her face in his hands, "what started as a contract has transformed into something no document could capture. But your reputation, the company, they will survive," he affirmed, with the same confidence he had shown in the boardroom. "What I cannot survive is losing you because of a mistake we both made." "Mistake?" "Believing we could control our feelings, as we control our finances," he explained, a small smile on his lips. "A mistake I thank every day for having made." In the following week, the rumors intensified. Gossip blogs amplified the story, and even some more respectable outlets made veiled mentions of the unusual beginning of the relationship between the Alistair heir and the teacher from the outer boroughs. Graham remained unshakable publicly, but Marianne could see the toll the situation was taking, not only on him, but on Eloise and the company as a whole. Shares remained volatile, and some investors began to express concern about the new chairman's emotional stability. The last straw came when Marianne was approached by a journalist as she left a private lesson she still maintained. "Miss Evans, how much did your silence cost? We have information that you signed a confidentiality agreement with the Alistair family. Marianne felt the world spin around her. The exact words of the contract, which she had sworn never to reveal, were now being thrown in her face in broad daylight. That night, when Graham arrived at the apartment they now shared, he found her with her bags partially packed. "What are you doing?" he asked, frozen at the bedroom entrance. "What I should have done weeks ago," she replied, unable to face him. "I'm stepping away before I cause any more damage to your life." "What are you talking about?" "Someone leaked contract details, Graham. Specific details, and as long as I'm here, this story won't die." She finally looked up, her eyes shining with suppressed tears. "I need to give you space to rebuild your life and your company without me." "No," he said simply, approaching and holding her shoulders. "I won't let you sacrifice what we have because of rumors or public opinion." "It's not just that," Marianne admitted. "It's because I don't know if I belong in this world, Graham. Since your father's death, I've felt like an imposter. The glances, the whispered comments, the constant pressure." "And you think I don't feel that way sometimes?" he retorted. "Do you think being born into privilege automatically makes me comfortable with the power I inherited?" Graham let out a bitter laugh. "I've spent my entire life feeling like an imposter under my father's gaze. The difference is that I learned to use that insecurity as fuel." Marianne sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. "I don't know if I have that strength." "You have more strength than you imagine," he replied, sitting beside her. "It was your strength that attracted me from the beginning, not the kiss at the shopping center, not your beauty, though both are memorable." He smiled briefly. "It was the way you remained true to yourself, even when everything around you was changing." He took her hands in his intense eyes fixed on hers. "I won't lie and say it will be easy. It won't be. There will be more rumors, more attacks, more moments when you question your decision to be with me." "Then why insist?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Because what we have is worth fighting for, Marianne." He touched her face softly. "My father taught me many things, but the most important thing I learned by observing his marriage, when you find someone who makes you better, who challenges you and supports you in equal measure, you don't give up, no matter how complicated it is." The words resonated within her, echoing the conversation she had had with Eloise. A backbone of steel to love and Alistair. "What if I'm not strong enough?" she asked, giving voice to her biggest fear. "Then I'll be strong for both of us, until you find your strength again." He smiled. "That's how it works, isn't it? We support each other when the other falters." Something inside Marianne quieted with those words, a growing certainty that, despite all obstacles, the place where she belonged was by this man's side. Not because of a contract, not for money or status, but for the love they had built on improbable foundations. "We have to face this head-on," she decided, wiping away a stubborn tear. "We can't stay on the defensive." Graham observed her with curiosity. "What do you suggest?" "The truth, or at least part of it, on our terms." The next morning, Marianne called Teresa and asked her to organize a press conference. The assistant, always efficient, managed to gather the main media outlets in less than 24 hours. The chosen location was the Alistair Foundation Auditorium, dedicated to educational projects, a neutral territory that represented the intersection of Graham's and Marianne's worlds. When they took the stage together, cameras flashed in a frenzy. Marianne wore a simple but elegant dress, her natural hair framing her face without elaborate makeup. Graham, in an impeccable suit, kept his hand firmly intertwined with hers. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice firm despite the evident tension. "We have called this press conference to directly address the rumors that have been circulating about our relationship." He looked at Marianne, who nodded slightly, encouraging him to continue. "Marianne and I met under unusual circumstances," he continued. "And yes, our initial encounter was marked by considerations that went beyond mere romantic attraction." A murmur ran through the room. Marianne took a deep breath, preparing for what was to come. "I was dealing with my father's terminal illness and the pressure to settle down my personal life. Marianne was overcoming a difficult breakup. We found in each other something we didn't expect, initially a convenient solution to immediate problems. He paused, letting the partial revelations sink in. He wasn't confirming a financial contract, but admitting the initial convenience of the arrangement, a carefully calculated half-truth. What we didn't foresee, he continued, his voice now softer, was how this arrangement would transform into something deeply genuine. Amidst the charade we built for the world, we found a truth neither of us was looking for. Marianne stepped forward, feeling it was time for her voice to be heard. I come from a very different world than Graham's, she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. A world where teachers don't circulate at gala events or attend corporate board meetings. I know many question my place beside him. She looked directly at the cameras, imagining Raphael and Deborah watching somewhere. The truth is, I questioned that place too many times, but I learned that true love doesn't respect social barriers, nor does it submit to external expectations. What Graham and I have built, from our meeting at the shopping center until today, is something that transcends any script that might have initially existed. A reporter raised a hand. Is there or was there a financial contract between you? Graham replied with the composure of someone who had already prepared his answer. There were agreements on how we would navigate our personal and professional lives, as in any relationship. The exact nature of these agreements remains private, just as intimate details of any couple should be. Another question arose. Miss Evans, how do you respond to accusations of opportunism? Marianne smiled softly. With the certainty that time will reveal the truth, I am not here for the Alistair Empire, for social events, or for access to a world of privilege. I am here because I found something rare in Graham, a partner who values me exactly for who I am, and not for what I can offer in material terms. The press conference continued for another 20 minutes, with increasingly direct questions. Marianne and Graham responded with a careful mixture of honesty and discretion, admitting enough to satisfy public curiosity without exposing the entirety of how their story had begun. When they finally left the stage, hand in hand and heads held high, they felt as if a weight had been partially lifted. They had not confirmed the financial contract, but they had acknowledged that their beginning was less romantic than the public image suggested. It was a calculated concession, and they hoped enough to stem the tide of more damaging speculation. Do you think it worked? Marianne asked, when they were safe in the privacy of the car. I'm not sure, Graham admitted, but we did what we could. The rest depends on time and our ability to prove, through actions, that what we have is real. In the following weeks, media coverage gradually shifted in tone. The partial confession had removed some of the scandalous appeal of the story. Some outlets even began to portray the couple as an example of how relationships can evolve from pragmatic beginnings to genuine connections, a narrative that, while simplified, was much closer to the truth than the previous accusations of pure opportunism. Raphael, realizing his moment of fame was running out, attempted one last desperate move. Using his new journalistic contacts, he gained access to a charity event where Graham was to be the main speaker. During the Q&A session, he stood up with a document in hand. Mr. Alistair, how do you explain this contract signed by Miss Evans, stipulating monthly payment for escort services? A deadly silence fell over the auditorium. Marianne, sitting in the front row, felt her blood run cold. It was impossible. The original contract had been destroyed months ago, replaced by a verbal agreement when their feelings became real. Before Graham could respond, a firm voice sounded beside Raphael. It was Eloise Alistair, who had attended the event without prior announcement. Mr. Davies, she said, her tone courteous but unyielding, I would like to examine that document, please. Disconcerted by the unexpected presence of the Alistair matriarch, Raphael handed over the paper. Eloise examined it for a few seconds before holding it up to the audience. This is a fraudulent document, she declared with undisputed authority. As a retired solicitor and Edward Alistair's wife for over 4 decades, I recognize a forgery when I see one. She turned to Raphael, who visibly paled. And I also recognize an attempt at defamation, motivated by personal resentment. The crowd began to murmur as security guards discreetly approached Raphael. Eloise continued, unperturbed. My son and Marianne have been hounded by petty rumors since they found happiness in each other. As a family, we initially decided not to dignify these accusations with responses. But now, she held up the forged document, when fraudulent documents are presented in public, we must take legal action. A family legal advisor, present at the event, immediately approached, taking the document and escorting Raphael out of the hall. The moment of tension had passed, transformed into an unexpected victory by Eloise's intervention. Later, in the car on the way home, Marianne held Eloise's hand. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not just for today, but for everything." Eloise smiled, squeezing her hand in return. "We're family now, dear, and family protects its own." Graham, sitting in the front seat, looked at the two most important women in his life through the rearview mirror. There was an expression of deep gratitude and determination on his face. 3 months later, in an intimate ceremony at the Alistair Beach House, Graham and Marianne were married. There was no media coverage, just close friends and family, including Marianne's mother, visibly emotional to see her daughter take this step. "Who would have thought," Eloise commented during the reception, watching the couple dance under the stars, "that kiss at the shopping centre would lead us here?" Marianne smiled, recalling the moment that had changed her life, the desperate impulse that, through a series of coincidences and choices, had led her to the man who was now her husband. "Sometimes," she replied, "the most improbable beginnings lead to the most perfect destinations." As they danced, Graham held Marianne closer, murmuring in her ear, "Not bad for a business arrangement, is it?" She laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Definitely the best investment I've ever made." "And me?" he asked, spinning her gently to the rhythm of the music. "What did I gain from this deal?" Marianne looked into his eyes, all the love she felt reflected in her smile. "A woman who kissed you out of desperation, loved you by choice, and will stay with you out of desire. Forever." He kissed her then, not like the theatrical kiss of their first meeting, nor like the calculated kisses of the first months of their agreement, but like a man who had found, against all odds, true love in the arms of someone who was supposed to be nothing more than a temporary solution to a complicated problem. The following year, the Alistair Group launched its largest social initiative to date, a scholarship program for public school teachers, offering specialization abroad and guaranteed implementation of innovative projects upon their return. The program director, naturally, was Marianne Evans Alistair, who had found a way to unite her passion for education with the power and influence of her new position. "Some say you only created this program to legitimize my presence in the company," she commented one night as she reviewed applications in her office at the mansion. Graham, who watched his wife work with admiration, smiled. "And what do you say?" "That they're partially right," she admitted, with the honesty that had always characterized their relationship. "But that doesn't diminish the positive impact we're having. Sometimes complex motivations can generate pure results." He approached, placing his hands on her shoulders and massaging gently. "Do you know what my father told me before he died? When we were alone?" "What?" "That you were exactly what I needed. Not just a companion who loved me, but someone who challenged me to use our privilege for something beyond accumulating more wealth." He leaned in, kissing the top of her head. "He saw in you what I also saw in that shopping center. A strength I didn't know I needed in my life." Marianne turned, pulling him into a kiss. "And I never imagined that a desperate kiss to avoid my ex would lead me to all of this." "The universe has a peculiar sense of humor," Graham commented, lifting her from the chair. That night, as they made love in the room that was now truly theirs, Marianne thought about how life could change in an instant, with an accidental bump, an impulsive kiss, an absurd proposal that had transformed into the greatest blessing of her life. The media eventually found new stories to pursue. Raphael and Deborah moved on with their lives, their moment of near fame forgotten, and the contract that once defined the terms of Marianne and Graham's relationship remained only as a distant memory, an improbable beginning for a love that, against all odds, proved stronger than any paper could capture. 2. Years after their wedding, while cradling their first child, a boy with his father's same intense eyes, Marianne received an unexpected visit. It was Teresa, the assistant who had accompanied her since the first day of her transformation. "I thought you might like to have this," Teresa said, handing her a sealed envelope. Inside, Marianne found the original contract, the document everyone believed had been destroyed. "I kept a copy safe," Teresa explained. "I thought one day you might want this reminder of how it all began." Marianne looked at the paper, the cold clauses that once tried to define something that had ended up becoming indefinable. With a smile, she placed her son in his crib and walked to the bedroom fireplace, lighting it with a click. "Thank you, Teresa," she said, holding the contract over the flames. "But I don't need reminders of our beginning. I prefer to focus on our future." As the paper burned, Marianne thought about how the best loves sometimes are born from the most improbable beginnings. A desperate kiss, a convenient agreement, a lie that, paradoxically, had led them to the deepest truth of their lives. When Graham entered the room, finding her before the fireplace with ashes at her feet, he didn't need to ask what had burned. Somehow he knew and approved. Silently, he wrapped her in his arms, and together they watched their son sleep, living proof that some stories, no matter how improbable their beginnings, deserve the most beautiful endings. The contract had served its purpose. What began as a commercial exchange had blossomed into a partnership for life, proving that, sometimes, the path to true love can start with a false step, or in their case with a desperate kiss exchanged between strangers in a luxury shopping center on a Saturday afternoon that would change their lives forever.